Welcome. Our organization is People Against Trafficking Humans Coalition of Kentucky, and we are pleased to welcome you to this education session titled Human Trafficking 101. This is a self-directed learning module presented via this recorded video and slide deck. This content was created to equip audiences with information about key components related to the crime of human trafficking with the aim to increase knowledge and promote ongoing learning. Thank you for devoting time to engage in learning about human trafficking in the United States.
Who we are. People Against Trafficking Humans Coalition of Kentucky's vision is an informed community united in its resolve to end human trafficking. We are driven by our mission, which is educating, informing, and empowering ourselves and others in understanding human trafficking and promoting and advocating social justice efforts toward its end. Visit our website to connect with us, join us in our efforts, or send a financial donation to support Path Coalition of Kentucky, a registered 501c3 in Kentucky.
In this virtual education session, terms and scenarios describing the different elements of human trafficking will be discussed and described. We issue a warning that the following content may be disturbing, inappropriate, or unsuitable for some people and younger audiences. We ask learners and viewers to consider whether or not to engage in watching this video based on your own judgment. There are not images detailing aspects of this crime or the people impacted by it, yet there are audio descriptions of elements of this crime, including sexual content and other content connected to the violence and exploitation inflicted on other human beings, including children and minors.
What to expect in this education module. Aligned with the Human Trafficking 101 framework, this module concentrates on the following elements: definitions, forms of human trafficking, key players, prevention and response, and call to action. This is a narrated slide presentation. A PDF document with the transcript of the recorded audio for each slide in the slide deck is also available via a link located below this video. In addition, source information and links to research or data utilized to create this education session are linked or cited within the transcript. Please exercise your own judgment and decide the pace of how you want to proceed with watching this video. Yet we encourage you to watch the entire module to enhance your understanding of this complex issue in our society.
Human trafficking is a global crime that trades in people and exploits them for profit. It is often described as the modern-day practice of slavery. People of all genders, ages, and backgrounds can become victims. The U.S. Department of State defines human trafficking as a crime whereby traffickers exploit and profit at the expense of adults or children by compelling them to perform labor or engage in commercial sex. In this session, we cite definitions established in the United States laws and federal agencies responding to this crime.
Definitions. The OVC defines sex trafficking as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purposes of a commercial sex act in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced is under 18. It is important to clarify that in cases involving minors, there is no requirement to prove force, fraud, or coercion. The United States Office for Victims of Crime oversees programs and grants for service providers and other professionals who assist victims of the crime of human trafficking. Additionally, OVC defines labor trafficking as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery.
Human trafficking is fueled by a high reward, low risk dynamic. This means that traffickers can exploit and expect to make a lot of money with the minimal fear of punishment or legal consequences. Human trafficking occurs when an individual and or a group or organization induces, recruits, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, or solicits a person or child by force, fraud, and or coercion for the purposes of involuntary servitude, debt bondage, slavery, forced labor, or a commercial sex act. The AMP model was derived from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, called the TVPA, and it equipped the U.S. government with new tools and resources and allowed for a common language to provide a comprehensive and coordinated campaign to combat and respond to this crime domestically and internationally. The law enhanced pre-existing criminal penalties and other related laws, afforded new protections to trafficking victims, and ensured that certain benefits and services are available to victims of trafficking once they become certified by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The image you see here comes from the Combating Trafficking in Persons Program Management Office, and the actions, means, and purpose, therefore the AMP model, illustrates the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, the TVPA, and their definition of human trafficking by exploring the key themes of the action, means, and purpose for trafficking. The AMP model is a tool to determine whether a situation fits the federal definition of human trafficking. The actions refers to the actions taken by the trafficker, such as recruitment, transportation, or control. The means refers to the methods used by the traffickers to compel the victim, including force, fraud, or coercion. And the purpose refers to the exploitation of the victim, which can include labor, sex trafficking, or other forms of exploitation. We offer these definitions for our audience to help build a foundation regarding the language and laws and policies in the United States. Definitions and tools give us a common language and enhance our understanding of this crime.
Vulnerability is a main attractor for human traffickers as it makes it much easier to gain and maintain control over the victim. Research has shown that a majority of victims of this crime are vulnerable, oppressed, and living in poverty. These factors, coupled with the ongoing demand for labor or sex services, fuels the success of the human trafficking industry. There is often a reference used that there is no perfect victim, and it is necessary for those of us in the anti-trafficking community to establish that human trafficking can happen in virtually any context to any person. However, there are vulnerabilities that increase a person's likelihood of experiencing trafficking. Poverty and/or systemic disadvantages are just some of the risk factors that increase vulnerability or risk of victimization. Victims may be in vulnerable situations due to various circumstances. Throughout this session, we highlight vulnerability in groups of people who are vulnerable specifically to human trafficking based on their identity, status, or lived experience. Survivors of human trafficking have confirmed that it is vital to assess and break down all the factors increasing vulnerability to victimization if we are to be successful in preventing and responding to trafficking occurrences and situations.
As just emphasized, we need to lift up being intentional and examining vulnerability in our awareness of understanding of why human trafficking happens. Yet it is also necessary to address the abilities of traffickers to target and ensnare victims. In some cases, individuals from stable and privileged backgrounds may also experience victimization due to situational factors or personal decisions. For example, an alarming trend over the past few years is the financial sextortion of teen boys in the United States, often not thought to be a vulnerable group to this crime or sextortion-based human trafficking cases, despite the FBI and other agencies issuing data about this group being targeted. With that said, it is necessary to highlight that human trafficking can happen to anyone. Victimization is not exclusively tied to socioeconomic status or oppression. Anyone can become a victim of trafficking regardless of whether that individual may experience any vulnerability. At PATH, we aim to raise awareness about the risks of victimization of this crime. It is necessary we build more prevention and protection efforts for disrupting the many forms of human trafficking and talking more about how vulnerability, as well as circumstances in a human's life, are important factors we need to be aware of and talk about. The following slides provide examples relevant to the methods or means we just defined that are used by the trafficker to compel the victim.
Force is used especially during the early stages of victimization when the trafficker breaks down the victim's resistance. It's often employed as a means to control victims. Force can involve the use of physical restraint or serious physical harm. Force can also be inflicted using physical and/or sexual violence, including sexual assault, rape, beatings, and physical confinement. Fraud involves false promises regarding employment, wages, working conditions, or other matters. Individuals might travel to another country under the promise of well-paying work at a farm or factory, only to find themselves manipulated into forced labor. Others might reply to advertisements promising modeling, nanny, or service industry jobs overseas, but be forced into involuntary prostitution once they arrive at their destination. Coercion is the act or process of persuading someone forcefully to do something that they do not want to do. Coercion can look like any scheme, plan, or pattern intended to cause a person to believe that failure to perform an act that would result in causing pain or serious harm against any person, using manipulation to threaten reputational harm, or threats of harm or violence against the victim or their loved ones. Traffickers often use false promises of love, especially with minors or women, grooming and gaining trust or attachment, fostering a romantic or sexual relationship, and then threatening to withhold their love or other needs. Exploitation of drug addiction, deprivation of contact with friends or family, the abuse or threatened abuse of the legal process, and exploitation based on age, disability, and socioeconomic status. While these means and methods listed are not exhaustive, research has shown these are prevalent in human trafficking occurrences. As a reminder, child sex trafficking does not require the use or threat of force, fraud, or coercion, although we know traffickers and buyers often use such tactics with children and adolescents.
Now that we have covered the means used by traffickers to compel victims, we are going to look at forms of human trafficking. Human trafficking is, again, the illegal exploitation of a person for their labor, services, or commercial sex. In this presentation, we choose to highlight the different forms of human trafficking that occur in the United States. The crime of human trafficking is complex and dynamic. It takes place in a wide variety of contexts, which contributes to some of the reasons it can be difficult to detect. Our aim with the following section is to examine and learn about the wide variety of contexts, so you as a learner in our audience may gain more understanding and knowledge of this complex and widespread crime in the United States. Sexual exploitation occurs when someone is deceived, coerced, or forced to take part in sexual activity. Places where someone could be sexually exploited include the internet, sex work, pornography, live streaming, financial sextortion, sex tourism, brothels and massage parlors, escort services, strip clubs or bars, forced marriage and child marriage, and the production and sharing of child sexual abuse materials, known as CSAM. Labor exploitation occurs when people are coerced to work for little or no remuneration, often under the threat of punishment. Sectors and industries where someone could be exploited for their labor and work include hospitality, manufacturing, factories, the entertainment and arts industry, restaurants and food services, domestic services, cleaning and janitorial services, agriculture, cultivating and harvesting cannabis, construction, landscaping, fishing industries, and logging industries. Human trafficking for criminal exploitation or forced criminality happens when someone is exploited by being forced to carry out criminal activity through coercion, threats, or deception. Forced criminality can take many forms. In the United States, we can see pickpocketing, bank and ATM theft, begging, peddling, shoplifting gangs, public solicitation for prostitution or sex work, drug distribution or cultivation, selling counterfeit items, social welfare fraud, traveling sales crews, and organ trafficking.
Familial trafficking occurs when a family member, a father, mother, sibling, grandparent, uncle, or aunt, or a guardian, such as a foster parent or intimate partner of the parent, facilitates the trafficking. Sometimes the parent is not actively facilitating, but is still complicit in the trafficking. Familial trafficking of minor children can include when parents or other family members allow sexual offenders to sexually abuse the victim in exchange for money, drugs, or a place to stay, or when caregivers produce child sexual abuse materials, still referenced as child pornography in some agencies, of their children and sell, trade, or post the contents in exchange for money or other things of value. The Counter Trafficking Data Collaborative revealed that 41% of all child sex or labor trafficking cases begin with some sort of recruitment from a family member. The data also revealed that the family members recruited or trafficked children in several main sectors where forced labor and child labor trafficking cases were identified, including begging, domestic work, hospitality, and illicit activities. In this section, we have provided you with a wealth of information detailing multiple forms of human trafficking. As a reminder, the purpose of this Human Trafficking 101 session is to provide a foundational introduction to this complex crime. Our aim here in this brief time is to provide you, as a learner, with a broader view of human trafficking. As you have seen, trafficking can take various forms, including sex trafficking, labor trafficking, child trafficking, domestic servitude, and forced criminality, each with its unique challenges. It is encouraged for our audience to engage in ongoing learning to gain a deeper understanding of the forms of human trafficking. You can start by clicking on the links located in the transcripts for this session to continue gaining knowledge and information.
Due to the complex nature of this crime, traffickers often operate under the radar, and some people who are trafficked in the United States are not going to self-identify as victims for various reasons. If a victim is aware of their exploitation, the adult or child in the trafficking situation frequently faces multiple types of barriers when trying to escape or seek help. For example, a young victim or a victim with a language barrier may be unable to disclose the information about their exploitation due to these various barriers.
The buyer is an essential player in the human trafficking industry, as the individual or group buying the sex or labor services is also violating the human rights of the child or adult victim. The buyers fuel the demand side of this crime by purchasing sex or forced labor from traffickers. The ongoing demand for labor and sex services fuels of the human trafficking industry. At the most basic level, explaining the occurrence of human trafficking comes down to an issue of economics. The industry is fueled by buyers who pay traffickers to supply victims to meet their demand. The sex buyer is an individual who exchanges something of value, such as money, for commercial sex, which may include exchange of money for sexual exploitation images or videos. The use of the internet, social media, and gaming platforms makes it easier for the commercial sexual exploitation of minors in our current culture. The buying and selling of children for the purpose of sexual exploitation happens everywhere. Research and data in the past few years shows us that the U.S. now hosts more child sexual abuse content online than any other country in the world. The volume of CSAM increased dramatically across the globe during the pandemic as both children and predators spent more time online than ever before. Traffickers prey on the economic and psychological vulnerabilities of victims to keep them in their control. Traffickers can be parents, other relatives or family friends, intimate partners, employers, government officials, service providers, peers in victims' communities, gangs or criminal networks, other trafficked persons, smugglers, or strangers. It is frequently observed that traffickers and their victims often share the same national, ethnic, or cultural background, allowing the trafficker to better understand and exploit the vulnerabilities of their victims.
Research and data has shown us that some populations are more vulnerable than others to various intersecting factors. Categories of individuals and groups at higher risk of human trafficking have been established to assist multiple groups and systems with a vested interest for best practices for prevention and response. For example, the relationship between race and the risk of being trafficked is profound. In some U.S. jurisdictions, African American minors, most of them girls, represent 50% or more of all juvenile sex trafficking victims. American Indian, Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander girls and indigenous girls are also more likely to be sexually exploited than their non-native peers. Another example is that research has shown that adults and minors with cognitive disabilities are at a heightened risk for human trafficking due to a combination of individual and societal factors. The traffickers exploit using isolation or lack of access to support networks. When we pose the question, who is vulnerable to human trafficking, the following list contains certain populations that are more vulnerable due to various social, economic, and individual factors. These include girls and women, the LGBTQ plus community, the Black, Indigenous, people of color or BIPOC community, youth in foster care, system-involved youth, young adults experiencing homelessness, minors and adolescents, undocumented persons, migrant workers, refugees and asylum seekers, and unaccompanied minors, and people who have experienced trauma or violence, and adults and minors experiencing cognitive or physical disabilities. Understanding vulnerability in human trafficking is crucial. It allows us to identify those at risk so that we can better protect people in these groups that we have categorized above. It's also good because it helps us effectively intervene and assist victims. Vulnerability has been defined by the United Nations as a condition resulting from how individuals negatively experience the complex interaction of social, cultural, economic, political, and environmental factors that create the context for their communities. At PATH, we join others in the anti-trafficking field that believe that addressing the root causes of inequity and discrimination that impact all these vulnerable groups can help us create a more just and equitable society, reducing the likelihood of exploitation and human trafficking. The 3 key ways that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act lays out to prevent and respond to human trafficking are through prevention, protection, and prosecution. Prevention focuses on raising awareness and educating the public about the risks and signs of trafficking. Protection involves providing safe and supportive services to victims of trafficking. And prosecution aims to hold traffickers accountable for their crimes. The next section provides a brief overview of human trafficking laws at the federal level and laws related to the human trafficking occurrences that was passed in the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
As mentioned throughout this session, the primary federal law addressing human trafficking is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, which defines trafficking, criminalizes it, and provides protection for victims. The TVPA has been reauthorized and updated multiple times. The Human Trafficking Prevention Act of 2022 also expanded the TVPA, including posting the National Human Trafficking Hotline number in public spaces. Other countries have laws and policies regarding human trafficking, and while some countries' laws align with or are similar to the US, there are some countries that have weak laws and gaps in policies and protections for the exploitation of humans. As of August 2020, 93% of countries had specific legislation on trafficking in persons that covered most or all forms of trafficking. This is a huge increase from December 2003, when only 18% of countries offered such legislation. Modern prohibitions of human trafficking in the United States have their roots in the 13th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in 1865 and abolished slavery and involuntary servitude in the U.S. except as punishment for a crime. The TVPA and multiple other laws and statutes in the United States, such as the Violence Against Women Act, Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, and the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act, are just a few examples of the multiple federal laws addressing trafficking in persons in the United States. Moving from the federal level to the state level, the Kentucky General Assembly and Governor enacted Kentucky's first human trafficking statute into law in 2007, which added human trafficking as a criminal offense to the Kentucky Revised Statutes. This law made human trafficking a crime and granted rights to victims. In 2013, the state further strengthened its efforts by passing the Human Trafficking Victims' Rights Act. This act strengthened penalties for traffickers and established a pathway to services for child victims. The following list includes acts related to human trafficking created or modified in Kentucky Revised Statutes, Chapter 529. In 2007, Senate Bill 43 was an act relating to human trafficking. In 2013, House Bill 3 was Human Trafficking Victims' Rights Act. In 2015, House Bill 427 was an act relating to internet crimes against children and making an appropriation. And in 2020, House Bill 2 was an act relating to human trafficking. The above is a summary of laws in Kentucky and is meant to provide a brief snapshot of the progress of addressing human trafficking in state laws and regulations. Kentucky has stepped up its anti-trafficking efforts since 2020 and has made progress in multiple areas. Survivors and advocates note that there are areas where legislative protection for survivors could be strengthened, particularly related to providing and funding the services required for child and adult survivors. Advocacy and support for establishing a comprehensive, trauma-informed approach across multiple systems when it comes to responding to trafficking victims and survivors continues to be lifted up in Kentucky.
Anyone has the potential to suspect and or observe or discover a human trafficking situation in the United States, in every zip code, in every urban, suburban, and rural community. The following slides will list common indicators, potential and possible indicators that have been associated with human trafficking. We reference them as red flags and warning signs to bring awareness to you as a learner. These indicators are not exhaustive, and it's important to note that these flags and signs may not indicate human trafficking. Yet, based on what you have learned in the previous section about the correlation and vulnerability and the correlation of those with this crime, we ask you to view this list remembering the dynamics of the crime. The list we have crafted is supported by the anti-trafficking research and data gathered over the past 10 years and is distributed often to help prevent and disrupt this crime.
Clothing is inappropriately sexual or inappropriate for the weather. They may have multiple phones or social media accounts. There could be signs of new access to money or luxury items without explanation, such as new jewelry, beauty products, shoes, or phones without any known form of income. They could be a minor that is frequently a runaway and may be staying with someone who is not their parent or guardian. They could check into hotels or motels with older males and referring to those males as a boyfriend or daddy. They could show signs of physical injuries and abuse. They could present with poor physical or dental health. They could have tattoos or branding on their neck and or their lower back. They may live with untreated sexually transmitted diseases, or they could exhibit self-harming behaviors such as cutting or an eating disorder.
Some red flags and warning signs continued. They could be minors serving in a restaurant. People or humans could be working in dangerous conditions without proper safety gear, adequate breaks, etc. Security measures that appear to keep people inside an establishment, such as barbed wire inside a fence or bars covering the insides of windows. Not allowing people to go into public alone or to speak for themselves is a big sign. Working long hours, restricted freedom in general, as I just noted, and then living at the place of employment and lacking official identification documents are also signs.
The person could seem overly fearful, submissive, tense, or paranoid. They could avoid eye contact, social interaction, and authority figures or law enforcement. They could seem to adhere to scripted or rehearsed responses in their social interactions. They could have a gang affiliation. They could have numerous school absences or appear malnourished. They could have substance misuse or abuse substances. They could appear destitute or lack personal possessions.
We provided this list of possible indicators because it is necessary to aid us in identification of human trafficking victims. Awareness of these red flags and warning signs and intervention through reporting them to the appropriate agencies increases the potential for victims to get help and prevent further exploitation. Recognizing and examining these potential indicators can empower individuals just like you to recognize and report potential trafficking situations, potentially saving lives and preventing further harm.
If you suspect someone is in a potential trafficking situation, do not confront a suspected trafficker or suspected victim. This could cause harm. Prioritize safety, and if required, call 911. If you witness suspicious activity, document the details. Note who is involved, how many people, any behaviors you see, identity descriptions, time of day, location, address, and observations or reasons for suspicion. Then make a report with the appropriate reporting agency. If you encounter someone you suspect could be a victim of trafficking and assess the suspected trafficker is not nearby or within earshot, ask if they're okay without indicating your suspicion. If a victim explicitly asks for help, ensure their immediate safety and move them to a secure location away from the trafficker's sight. We want to emphasize that Kentucky is a mandated reporter state, meaning that anyone who has reasonable cause to believe a child is dependent, neglected, or abused must report it. This means that suspected trafficking of a minor must be immediately reported. This law indicates that it is the duty of anyone who has reasonable cause to believe that a child is dependent, abused, or neglected to report it. Any adult, a teacher, a neighbor, or healthcare professional, a coach, a scout leader, a family member, bus driver, or a DoorDash delivery person has a duty to report suspected exploitation of a minor or suspected exploitation of vulnerable adults.
Now that you have learned about some of the possible indicators of human trafficking occurrences, heard about the behaviors or observations of individuals that could indicate risk of human trafficking or current exploitation, it is necessary to review the reporting process of these crimes or potential crimes. These agencies that we are going to list represent the commonly published instructions for reporting information or observations of suspected human trafficking happening to adults or child victims. As you see here on your screen, we have the National Human Trafficking Hotline. To connect victims and survivors to help or resources or to report suspected human trafficking, contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Call 1-888-373-7888 or a texting feature, text help or info to be free. To report suspected human trafficking to federal law enforcement, contact the U.S. Department of Homeland Security Investigations, commonly known as HSI, and their tip line at HSI is 1-866-347-2434. To report suspected child sex or labor trafficking to state law enforcement in Kentucky, you're going to contact the Kentucky State Police at their Kentucky Missing and Exploited Children Unit at 1-800-543-7723. For child sex trafficking, call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's cyber tip line at 1-800-THE-LOST or make a report online at the cyber tip line. There are multiple agencies equipped to take reports about suspected human trafficking, such as local law enforcement or the Kentucky Cabinet for Health and Family Services. Yet the 4 agencies we included in this session should be saved to your phone or posted somewhere that is easy to reference. The most important message here for you as a learner is to feel confident in knowing the process for reporting.
We issue a call to action to you to promote the essential need for awareness raising and increasing understanding around this complex problem in human rights crisis. Share information and knowledge you gained after engaging in this education module with 1 to 2 other people, or visit our website at pathcoalitionofky.org to join us in our efforts to combat human trafficking.
We thank you for engaging in this Human Trafficking 101 education session. Research, narration, and production brought to you by me, Jamie Thompson,
and me, Josh Bowling. Please consider taking 5 minutes of your time to complete a brief survey to help Path Coalition of Kentucky collect feedback about your learning and experience so we can evaluate the human trafficking awareness education module you completed. A link to this survey is provided below this video and will also be emailed to you if you provided your email address in a registration process to view this education module.
Please contact PATH via our website to request collaboration, connection, or education and awareness materials. Thank you.